Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, La ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika lah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Praise be to God, Lord of the universe. There is no God but God. He has no partners, and I totally submit myself to Him alone. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, and I would like to congratulate everyone again who is participating in this Quran study today. It's a great blessing and mercy from our God that He has given us the opportunity to come together during these Quran studies. The Quran studies are great feast for our souls, and by the will of God, it will help our souls to grow. So today I'm the teacher, and may God guide me during the study. We start at Surah 16, verse 45. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful.
I think someone needs to mute their microphone. Bia, I think your microphone is on. Okay.
Yeah. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. 1645. Did those who shame evil shames guarantee that God will not cause the earth to swallow them, or that the retribution will not come to them when they least expect it? So in the Quran, God gives us the example of generations before us of what happened to them. For example, Qarun, the tyrant's inevitable fate. In Surah 28:81, it says, "We then caused the earth to swallow him and his mansion. No army could have helped him against God. He was not destined to be a winner." Those who were envious of him the day before said, "Now we realize that God is the one who provides for whomever he chooses from among his servants and withholds. If it were not for God's grace towards us, he could have caused the earth to swallow us too. We now realize that the disbelievers never succeed. It may strike them while they are asleep. They can never escape." So in Surah 797, it says that the people of the present communities guarantee that our retribution will not come to them in the night as they sleep. Or it may strike them while they are fearfully expecting it. Your Lord is compassionate, most merciful. Did the people of today's communities guarantee that our retribution will not come to them in daytime while they play? So in the Quran, there's a verse where God is talking about the people. Today we know them as the people of Pompeii and what happened to them. So these people, some of them, they wanted the retribution to come and they mocked the messenger. And there is a video I want to show where it gives information about. I will play it for short, not too long.
You might be forgiven for thinking that the most disturbing part of the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD was the sheer suddenness of Pompeii's destruction. But while the town's destruction was unspeakably tragic, the speed at which it happened wasn't nearly the worst thing about it. Two festivals happening in the town at the same time meant the tragedy at Pompeii ended up so much worse than it should have been. According to the book Pompeii, an archaeological guide, the Pompeians were in the middle of a multi-day celebration in honor of the Emperor Augustus. Known today as the first emperor of the Roman Empire, Augustus had died 65 years earlier and had just been made a god, as well as having the month of August named after him. Pompeii's streets were filled with public celebrations, including street musicians, fortune tellers, plays, and athletic events. Many of those performers and athletes came from outside Pompeii to take part in the event, as did the visitors and tourists who came to see them. We can't know exactly how many extra people were in the town at the time of its destruction, but it is certain a lot more lives were lost than might have happened if the eruption had happened a month later. Even worse, the day before the eruption was Vulcanalia, the festival of the god Vulcan, otherwise known as the god of fire and volcanoes. It wasn't so much that the people of Pompeii didn't get a warning that Mount Vesuvius was going to erupt, because there definitely would have been smoke, small earthquakes, and loud rumblings at the very least. It was more that because of Vulcanalia, they would have interpreted these signs as good omens from the god rather than the warnings to get out of Dodge. As far as the townspeople cared, these warnings were simply signs that Vulcan was busy at his forge inside Mount Vesuvius, perfectly happy that everyone was celebrating his special day.
We're in Pompeii. That is Volcano Day.
It wasn't just the timing of the festivals that screwed everyone over in Pompeii, though. It was also the weather. According to Perspecto Weather, the wind in that part of Italy during August tends to blow in a southwesterly direction. If this had been the case during the eruption, the cloud of ash and deadly gas from the volcano would have blown away from Pompeii. Sure, there still would have been the whole heat and lava thing to contend with, but that wasn't what killed most people in the city. If the ash and gas had spread in the direction the wind normally blew, far more people would have likely survived. But for some reason, that day the wind was blowing to the northwest, straight towards Pompeii. Aside from dooming the town itself, this also meant that many of the townspeople couldn't escape. Pompeii sits on a bay, and some people evidently attempted to escape by ship, but our only eyewitness account of the tragedy, by Pliny the Younger, says the wind was blowing dead inshore and stopped terrified residents, including his own uncle, from leaving that way. Their most effective escape route was blocked off because of a bizarre change in the weather. In fact, the nature of the wind that day was so bizarre that it has caused some historians to think we have the date of the eruption wrong. According to the Australian National Maritime Museum, the unexpected wind pattern could mean the eruption took place in autumn, later in the year than first thought.
So in this video, we could see they give some information about what happened that day with the Pompeii, and it says there was a wind that was so unexpected. They thought it's like the normal present day what's happening there with the eruption of the volcano, but that day something else happened. The wind came from from the other side, and it was very unexpected for the people at that.
Dit is wat je moet doen als je 's ochtends je bed niet uitkomt. Want als je 's ochtends moeite hebt om op te...
So in 29:53, it says they challenge you to bring the retribution. If it were not for a predetermined appointment, the retribution would have come to them immediately. Certainly, it will come to them suddenly when they least expect it. Anyone who dies before the age of 40 goes to heaven, and not everyone deserves this. People sometimes lament the slowness of justice when a vicious criminal is not executed promptly. God knows who deserves heaven. See Appendix 4615 and Appendix 32. In 29:54, it says, they challenge you to bring retribution. Hell already surrounds the disbelievers. The day will come when the retribution overwhelms them, from above them and from beneath their feet. He will say, taste the consequences of your works. Though in 26:01, it says, though they cannot believe in it, not until they see the painful retribution. It will come to them suddenly when they least expect it. They will then say, can we have a respite? Did they not challenge our retribution? As you see, we allowed them to enjoy for years. Then the retribution came to them, just as promised. In Surah 39:55, it says, and follow the best path that is pointed out for you by your Lord, before the retribution overtakes you suddenly when you least expect it. Lest a soul may say, how sorry I am for disregarding God's commandments. I was certainly one of the mockers. So in the Quran, God gives us examples of the people who have tasted the retribution and how it came suddenly to them. So we have, for example, the flood came to the people of Noah. Even his own son tasted the retribution. The storm came to the people of Hud. In 46:24, it says, when they saw the storm heading their way, they said, this storm will bring us much needed rain. Instead, this is what you challenged Hud to bring, violent wind, wherein there is painful retribution. So the retribution is coming suddenly to them, to all those peoples. And the reason is because they are mocking it. So God says in the Quran that he sends messengers to every community, and almost all of them, they mocked the messengers, or they killed the messengers, or the messengers were forced to leave the area. The quake came to the people of Salih. In 777, it says, subsequently, they slaughtered the camel, rebelled against their Lord's command, and said, O Salih, bring the doom you threaten us with if you are really a messenger. Consequently, the quake annihilated them, leaving them dead in their homes. So, when God is giving us examples in the Quran about the people before us, the generations before us, I searched in the Quran to what happened to those generations, and almost all of them, it's actually the same. So God sends a messenger to the people to warn them, and to ask if they can leave their gods and believe in the one and only God. They mock, they don't believe, and if a messenger tells them that the retribution is going to come, they say, bring it, bring the doom you threatened us with. And after that, it really happens. You know, in every verse where God speaks about, for example, Saleh, Hud, or Noah, or the other messengers, the retribution came to them. So it's not a joke. It's really serious. The message. You cannot just take a message and not believe in it. You should really take it seriously and think about it. And besides that, God says in the Quran that He doesn't bring the retribution to a community on which He didn't send a messenger. So if you are a community who didn't get a messenger or a warning, God is not going to send you a retribution. And if a retribution comes, that means that God has sent to those people a messenger, and they didn't. They mocked the messengers, and they didn't believe in the miracles they brought. So we should really take it seriously. If God sends a messenger, we really consider and look at the proofs that the messenger brings with it. That's actually what we did. We checked the evidence, and God willing, we saw that it's the truth, it's the reality, and it's the truth. And God will, God willingly, protect us from the retribution, if there is any retribution that will come. So in 1648 it says, "Have they not seen all the things created by God? Their shadows surround them right and left in total submission to God, and willingly." So everything that is created is in total submission to God. The difference between a believer and a non-believer is that a believer submits willingly to God, and the non-believer does submit unwillingly. So submission to God is already done by everyone and everything that is created. So in one of his videos, he gives the same example, and it says that everything that God has created, like our heartbeat, our hearts, our lungs, our all body parts, everything that exists in this in the universe, they are submitting to God. Even the shadows, like the sun is submitting. It has a predetermined time when it comes up and goes down. So the difference between a believer and a non-believer is that a believer is submitting to God willingly. So we should, in daily basis, if something happens to us, we know that God is doing it, right? God is running everything, and we shouldn't complain. Like a believer never complains. We should never complain. And we should totally submit to the will of God. 1649. To God prostrates everything in the heavens and everything on earth, every creature, and so the angels, without the least arrogance. The footnote says the human body, whether it belongs to a believer or a disbeliever, submits to God. The heartbeats, the lungs movement, and peristalsis illustrates this submission. So the thing is that we as human beings, we have like, how do you say this? We know that we exist, right? There is a consciousness. It's called consciousness. We know that we exist, and we have a consciousness. And with this consciousness, we should think about this. We should think about the things that we cannot control. And a believer knows actually that we can't control anything. All the control belongs to God, God alone. So we know from the Quran that Satan thought that he could be a god, like that he could control things. and God gave him permission to show his incompetence, actually. So as believers, we are right now in the world, and we are witnessing that only God can be in control, in total control, and none but God is in control. We should believe in this, in everything that happens to us in daily basis. They reference their Lord high above them, and they do what they are commanded to do. God has proclaimed, "Do not worship two gods. There is only one God. You shall reverence me alone." So one of the most important thing is referencing God alone and not mentioning other names beside God. In the Quran, there is a verse where God tells us that why we should do the contact prayers, and He says to remember me. The contact prayers we are doing to remember God so that our souls may grow by it. And if you reference someone else besides God, then you don't believe in one God, and you don't obey one God. And all around, all in the Quran, God is talking about the only one God. The most important thing in the Quran is that we leave everything besides God and believe only in Him and do only in the things that He commands us to do. So if you, for example, believe that there are some things that are prohibited besides what is in the Quran, that means that you don't have one God. You don't believe in one God. There are other gods in which you are believing in. And the most important thing is that we should look in the Quran to those things. Does the Quran say that it is prohibited or not? One of the examples was lately, last Thursday, that we had a discussion about going to the masjids and doing the wudu there, if it was prohibited or not prohibited. And we read a verse in the Quran where it says that we shouldn't pray in the mosques. And it didn't say that we couldn't do the ablution in those mosques. So I thought that first that the ablution was also a prayer. But if God wanted to prohibit doing ablution in the mosque, in those mosques where there is idolatry, God would have said this in the Quran. So it is really important that we check everything in the Quran and look at the verses with a lot of care, and don't do the things that are not there. So we don't accept anything that is not in the Quran. That's very important, because or else you're going to have more than one God if you do that. In 1652 it says, "To him belongs everything in the heavens and the earth, and therefore the religion shall be devoted absolutely to him alone. Would you worship other than God?" So God is the one who created everything in the heavens and the earth. So imagine that there are some groups, some people who even point out people like in the I don't know how to call this in English, but it's called tariqat, and you have some people there, and people give a lot of they bring those people even higher than God. They say, for example, that if the sheikh says that God does not exist, you should believe in him. You know, so unrespectfully that they put other people above God, while God is the one who created everything in the heavens and the earth. So how can you? So like it's a very, very big fault of people who believe like this. And God says that He will never forgive shirk. He will never forgive idolatry. And after thinking of all the things that God has created, like when we are in the flood, when God asked all the souls if God is the one God, some of us, we were in a doubt. And if you think of like how many things God created in these 7 universes, how many atoms in one square, the electrons, and think about all the stars and all the planets and all the things that He created, and He controls everything, and still we had some doubts about it. It's very it's very unbelievable, and it's really an unforgivable sin, idolatry. And the reason is that people do not really know God. And the most important thing about knowing God, like the messenger of God says, is that God is running everything. God is doing everything. Only if you know truly God, then you believe in God. If you don't truly know Him, you cannot believe in Him. So um, the most important thing about God is that He is doing everything and He is running everything. 1653. Any blessing you enjoy is from God. Yet, whenever you incur any adversity, you immediately complain to Him. We should know that every blessing comes from God. In other words, God says everything that's good comes from me, and everything that's bad that happens to you is from yourself. So if anything that bad happens to us, we should look at ourselves and correct ourselves. And we should look at our daily life. If anything that we are doing is against the Quran and not with the Quran, and we should remind each other to do that. Yet as soon as He relieves your affliction, some of you revert to idol worship. In another verse in the Quran, God tells us the story about the people who are in a ship and the storm comes to them, and they prostrate to God and ask for His help, and God helps them and brings them to safe ground. And God says immediately when they put their foot at the ground, they revert to idol worship. So the human beings are really ignorant. And the way to deal with this is actually to really remember God in everything and everything that happens to us in daily basis. That is, my opinion is that it's very important. You know, when we eat something, an apple, we should think about how this apple came into existence. You know, the color, the smell, the taste of it. We should know that God made it. And, you know, even as simple as it looks, it's an apple, but actually, if you look very carefully, there are millions of aspects to it. And if you think about it, it's like mind-blowing how God had created it. And we're just talking about just one apple. There's only one apple in in all the things that God has created in this earth and in the heavens and in the whole universe. So for someone who is using his mind and thinks about God and is in search for the truth, actually it shouldn't take a lot of time to know that there is a God and there is a power that created everything. Like the example of Abraham, where he looked at the stars and looked at the moon and the sun, and he was never an idol worshiper. So he used his mind to know that there should be only one God that created everything and is the one with the only power, the one who has the power to create and create everything. So God created so many things around us, like the trees, the flowers, the heaven, the smallest things, the animals, everything around us is telling that there is only one God, that God exists, that there is something that or someone that created all of those things. So when you die and you wake up in the hereafter, you cannot complain actually about it. That God will tell you that He created a lot of things that if you only would look at them, that you could see that it can't be coincidence, and that those things created by itself, and that you don't have any excuse actually. How can you have an excuse after seeing all, especially in this time, you know, when we have satellites, we have telescopes, we have a lot of things, and we have the internet. If you go on YouTube and search for anything, you can see the details, and you can use your mind. But the people of today, they are very busy with a lot of other things than um, um, they don't want to think about God. They don't want to think about how they came into existence and how the universe works. You know, even the shadows, like God gives the example in the Quran that the shadows on the right and the left, how it works. You know, that, and people should think about it. And I think the reason why they don't is they don't care about the truth. And God says in the Quran, if you don't care about the truth, so God says in the Quran that only if you want to know the truth, then God will show you the truth. And if you don't want to see the truth, even if God sends messengers or miracles, or like the miracle of the 19, we know now, it is not going to help. People who don't want to know the truth, even if they see God physically, they will not believe this. One of my customers, he was an atheist, and we were talking about the existence of God and about how everything came into existence. I showed him the evidence of the miracle of 19, and he said that we cannot trust numbers, because those numbers in our dimension are maybe very different in another dimension. So it was very strange. And in the end, he admitted that I asked actually him, if you could see God, like physically, you're standing here and you see the God, like you can see the sun right now, would you believe in them? And he admitted that he won't. So not everyone is here in this world to believe in the proofs and the miracles that God has sent, unfortunately. So let them disbelieve in what we have given them. Go ahead and enjoy temporarily. You will surely find out. So God says that He gives the people in this world some time to enjoy the life in this world, and it will surely end. You know, today the average person lives up to 60 years, maybe 70 years. So for how long are you going to enjoy this temporary world? Let's say 1,000 years. What is going to change? Or 5,000 years? Eventually it's going to end. But God says that the hereafter is endless, is forever. And someone who is in search for the truth and uses his mind and is really truthful towards himself as well, you would see immediately that the life of the hereafter is much better. The life of the hereafter, if you compare that to the life that we are having here, let's say for 100 years, is actually nothing. In one of the videos of Dr. Rashad, he gives the same example, and he says that if you divide, if I'm not mistaken, if you divide infinite with 100 or 100 with infinite, you get 0. So everything that you do for this world is nothing. So we should use our time, mostly of our time, and devote it to God and God alone. 1656. They designate for the idols they set up out of ignorance a share of the provisions we bestow upon them. By God, you will be held accountable for your innovations. They even assign daughters to God, be he glorified, while they prefer for themselves what they like. So in another verse in the Quran, God says that if I'm not mistaken, Lat, Uzza, and Menat, these are the names of the angels, and they say that those are the daughters of God. And at that time in the Arabic country, having a daughter was a shameful thing. They thought it was a shameful thing to have, and they buried their daughters alive. And God is saying to them, yeah, you want to have sons, and you are telling me that I have daughters? When one of them gets the baby girl, his face becomes darkened with overwhelming grief. Ashamed, he hides from the people because of the bad news given to him. He even ponders, should he keep the baby grudgingly or bury her in the dust? Miserable indeed is their judgment. So imagine that you have a child, and immediately when you learn that it's a girl, you are ashamed of it. Like, some of us have children, and when I read this verse, I was really shocked. How can someone be ashamed and think about burying a baby while she is still alive? So we see that the people are really, really ignorant. There was one of the video I watched lately, a video, and it was about Russia and Ukraine. In the 1930s, I believe, in Ukraine there was a lot of poverty, and the Russian government they sent a message to the people with throwing papers from the aeroplanes, and they wrote there. Please do not forget that they are your children, so don't eat them. It was really shocking for me to read that. That people can come to a place where you can bury your own daughter alive, and God sends a messenger and tells that it's wrong. And I don't know if still today there are people who are thinking like that. Like, for example, in the Turkish area, a lot of Turks, when they have like in my own family, some guy has 7 daughters and 1 son. So he tried to have a son all those years, and every time when it was not a son, he tried again to get a son. So still there is a huge problem with people thinking that having a son is better than having a daughter. It still exists, and it's actually a shameful thing, because having a daughter and the son, it's the same, and God gives them to us, and we should be very thankful. And it reflects also, like, if God gives you daughters, then you should submit to it, and if he gives you sons, you should submit as well. It shows a a lack of confidence in God. And you could see directly that those people are non-believers. And when they die and they open their eyes in the hereafter, they will see immediately. They will be sorry eventually, I think, but it will be very late for them. So in 1660, it says, those who do not believe in the hereafter set the worst examples, while to God belongs the most sublime examples. He is the Almighty, the most wise. So I don't know how much time went by, and I wanted to stop here.
MashaAllah, 35 minutes.
Okay, so this was, I wanted to stop here because the next subject, if I go to that, it will be very long. If there are any questions, God willing, we can hear them.
Mashallah, thank you very much. Good stuff.
MashaAllah, brother. Thank you.
MashaAllah.
MashaAllah, brother. God bless you.
MashaAllah. God bless you, brother.
MashaAllah, thank you.
The number that you mentioned, it was 100 divided by infinite. That's what the Messenger of Covenant said. Or he said, even if if it is 1,000, again divided by infinite, it would be 0. So that was the number.
Yeah, MashaAllah, thank you, brother. So even if it's 1 million years in this world, 2 million years, what will change? Nothing will change, actually. And knowing that, our souls, if they are going to live forever, and God willing, in the paradise, and hopefully closest to God, infinitely, forever being the closest to God, that would be very, that would be the best thing that will happen to us, right? And the other way is also very scary. If you don't make it and you die, you will be forever in hell. It's like forever, never stopping, never ending. It's very scary to think about it. So, but it's a good thing to remember, right? A good thing to remember that that there are two ways. One way goes to hell, and the other way goes to heaven, or to paradise. For the believer, it's like it will help you not to do a sin if you remember this all the time, and to do the commandments that God has given. So both ways, and thinking about life forever in paradise, very close to God, with all the provisions He promised to give, it warms my heart.
Yes, inshallah, it actually warms every one of, each one of our heart, and this is what keeps us going during the day and makes us be aware of the consequences. That it's either all the blessing and the love coming from God for eternity, or hell. And the hell actually makes us very scared, but it also stops us from thinking a certain way or doing things that are not righteous.
There was one thing about being asleep in Surah 46 and 16. A human being needs a sleep, and you cannot stay awake for a long time. Let's say 3 days maximum, or 4. Eventually you are going to sleep, and what happens to you is like When you are in sleep, you cannot control your body, right? And you don't know what's happening at that moment. And if the retribution comes, it's like, please correct me if I'm wrong, the least expected moment. I thought about it, like, you're asleep and you don't see anything, you don't hear anything, and while you're asleep, retribution comes to you. The moment when you are at least in control, let's say.
Yes, mashallah. Brother, I was wondering whose mic is on, and I appreciate it if um, he or she could, because I'm trying to mute everyone for you to speak, but yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, brother. Thank you.
Yeah, since we're on that topic of hell, I just wanted to mention I was listening to the Quran the other day, Surah 72, and I've never, I think I heard this for the first time. It says in verse 17, it says, "We will surely test them all. As for him who disregards the message of his Lord, he will direct him to ever increasing retribution." And so maybe some of y'all can comment on this, but the ever increasing retribution it kind of makes me wonder, is like day by day, hour by hour, day by day, year by year for eternity? Is the torment going to actually become more painful instead of just being at a certain level or threshold, which it's real hard to put on, to think about, but I'm wondering what that means.
Right. So the way I understand that one, if no one else has comment, I can answer this one. Is that God says that our heaven and hell basically begins here, and so if you're on a righteous path, your life will begin to become better and better as time goes by. So your life will get better and better. You'll become happier as time goes on, and to the point that, like the messenger says, for example, that the last 10 years of the believers are the best years of his life, right? And then obviously, then when your life in this world ends, then God says that you have no idea how much joy and happiness are waiting for you in the hereafter as a reward for your efforts. That's even greater. So that's how I see it increasing. And the same way with the disbelievers, when the disbelievers insist on disbelieving, first, they get little warnings, little pinches, warnings, and they don't take heed. Then it gets harder, more difficult. They don't take heed. Then eventually, they get the final retribution of annihilation. And obviously, then we know that the retribution the hereafter is even worse. And it's so it's becoming worse and worse for them, and in the hereafter. So it'll be worse this way. Also, another thing I wanted to mention, as we're talking about retribution, and we see these examples of communities being annihilated as groups. I mean, these are for people at a predetermined time where the entire communities were evil and they were annihilated, right? But now we see a different situation where you may have different groups of people living together, where you could have good people living in the same town as bad people, and maybe even in the same household. So God is not going to send for those cases. God will not send retribution for a group. Of course, we know that we have the smoke coming, and that's destined for a group of people that are, as a bunch, all bad. For example, it's going to hit in the Middle East, we know, and all of the Middle East, the Messenger of the Covenant talks about how they have been, forsaken by God because of their own behavior, and none of them accepts the message. So they are destined to be annihilated as a community. But we can see around us there are good people and bad people everywhere, and in those situations, there's people among us that are seeking forgiveness, and there's people that are doing evil. And so for those types of people, retribution comes individually to people, and people are annihilated individually. And people are inflicted with viruses, diseases, cancers, all types of things that selectively target people. For example, we have the example of AIDS, that is mostly a homosexual disease, and people are annihilated individually, and these are specifically people who are involved in these types of behaviors. And then you have other diseases like cancer that are selectively put on certain individuals by God. I mean, allowed by God, obviously executed by Satan, because nothing bad comes from God. So this retribution is something that comes to people individually, and for the most part, obviously, these are things also when it happens to people, they don't expect it. They least expect to get cancer, for example. Suddenly we find out, somebody got cancer, and they never smoked their whole life, and they get cancer, for example, right? So these are also some things that we need to be aware of, God willing.
Can we like if there are some people which we know of, and you can see, right, like there are some people in my family that that died recently, and their last years were very painful, and can we say about them that one of those people is my grandfather. I gave him the message of 19 and spoke with him about it. And his last years were very, very painful. He needed to go to the hospital. He had a lot of painful things going on, in even until the last minute, of his life. Can we say that he is going to hell, or shouldn't we think about it like that?
I mean, we know God's system, right? So you can I mean, I don't know exactly his situation, but the thing is, like, if you know that he's the person that did all these things, and then you see bad things happening, then it's God's system, right? I mean, God shows you. Sometimes God says he shows you retribution, and other times, you might not live to see it, or you may not see it. But this is God's system, right? So, I mean, if you know about a person that has been doing these things, and then you see these things coming, then you know that this is God's system, right? Just in place, manifesting itself to you. But what I think people should be careful about is, sometimes somebody will. I mean, these are things we have seen, right? So sometimes somebody will get some cancer or something. So for example, just by looking at the person getting cancer, like, you can't say, well, this person has cancer, so this person must be a disbeliever. But you have examples of people, for example, like I said, for example twice. So you have example of people that will be hypocrites, and they preach hypocrisy, they preach innovations, right? And they spread doubts, and then when the end comes, they get inflicted with cancer and have miserable last couple years, and then they die of these types of illnesses after a lot of suffering and pain, like you said. So then it's obvious.
Yeah, so for example, in the example of Lut, he is leaving the city, and God tells him not to look back, right? And standing there, knowing that the retribution is going to come to all of those people, he would say, yes, none of them were believers, right? So when a retribution comes to some people, which are, a messenger came to them. Like today, it's the same thing. God sent the messenger of the covenant, and people didn't believe in him. So when you see that things are happening, we could say that they deserve the retribution because they didn't believe in the message that God sent to them, and they even killed the messenger.
What I'm saying is,
yes, brother.
yeah, I mean, when you see people do that, because you know that these people didn't do it, and it came to them, but also like you have people that that, for example, are going through an admission test. For example, like Job had an admission test, right? So it didn't leave any permanent damage. He was restored, so somebody could, get some kind of a, really serious type of illness, even as part of his admission test in the beginning. And then that could be restored, without leaving any permanent damage. So there are many different circumstances. So I was saying, like, you can't, put everything in one bucket and say, just because someone got a serious illness means they're a disbeliever, for example, right? But you have, when you see proof, like, okay, this person did all these things, and now you see painful suffering at the end, then you know that. I mean, if you just see someone dying of painful suffering and eventually you see them crumbling, because of it every day, and you see their life is painful and sad, you know that this person is not a believer for sure, right? So
Because
that
God
part is true.
promised,
But
right?
what I was saying, yeah. But what I was saying was like, what can happen is, let's say someone's a believer, right, or a new submitter, and something really terrible, seemingly terrible, happens to them, and someone could look at it and say, oh, this person's not a submitter, this is why this thing is happening. So those types of situation, I was saying, we should be careful about. But when you know that something like this is happening and there's misery and suffering and pain, obviously that's not a sign of a believer. The life and death of a believer, God says, is not the same. So,
hey, Jafer, maybe this verse, I understand what Solomon's saying. Maybe this verse will help. It says, we let them taste the small retribution of this world before they incur the retribution of the hereafter, that they may take a hint and reform. That's in Surah 32. So if, I guess if that may help, because I guess, some retributions, are like Solomon said, a test, or to get us on the right track,
Yeah, and one of the things where the question comes from is actually like, for example, there is a family member who died, and then you want to make a prayer for that person. For example, the mother of my wife, she died, and after my wife became a submitter, she asked me, okay, she really wanted to make a prayer for her mother, and I gave for a very long time the message of 19, and the whole message I spoke about it. She didn't accept it. So, and when she asked me about it, I actually told her that she was not a believer, and you cannot ask for forgiveness for someone who is not a believer, right? And there comes the question, okay, are we really sure? Can we really say that? Can I say it? Can I say that about her mother, or can't I?
well, you're not supposed to ask forgiveness for idol worshippers, right? So if you know someone's an idol worshipper, you can't ask forgiveness for them.
Hello, brother. Salaam alaikum.
What Mr. Salomon said is completely true. True. It happened to my father exactly. He was very healthy. He never smoked, but he was not a believer. I told him about Dr. Rashad Khalifa message, and he rejected completely. And what happened to him was cancer, and he died. He was suffering very much before his death. So it's completely true. But you said something that no one from the Middle East is a believer. I'm from the Middle East and I'm from Egypt and I'm a believer.
Well, when I didn't say Middle East, did I say Middle East?
Yes, brother Solomon.
Right. Well, okay. So let me clarify that. Yeah, I meant to say from the Arabian Peninsula. So Egypt is not part of the Arabian Peninsula. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, sorry, no problem. And also, what happened about Jesus when the disciples of Jesus asked a big meal or a big party from the sky, and God gave them this, and God said that if somebody disbelieves, He will punish them severely after this. So if you ask for, yeah, exactly, brother.
MashaAllah.
So it is very clear that if somebody disbelieves after they ask God, I was asking God for something proves that God exists, and God gave me Dr. Rashad Khalifa messenger, and I was in the United States, and I met his brother, and then if I don't believe now, then I'm gonna get my retribution. This is very clear. It happened to the disciples of Jesus. When God tells them that He will punish them severely if they do not believe in His message after they ask for the proof. That's all I want to clarify, brother. Thank you.
Mashallah, thank you. Nice to meet you also.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
MashaAllah, as we learned from Moses' story and Pharaoh, that when he came to him and they rejected him and God did not annihilate them right away, He gave them plagues, frog and blood and all those kind of things that happened. Those were sort of retribution for them they may ponder. Those people who reject God's revelation, and when they suffer with something bad, this is actually a mercy of God that He is still giving them a chance they may repent. Because if the minute you reject God's message and God lets you live a happy life, which is nothing basically, a very short life, and all of a sudden you die and you go to hell, these are smaller retributions are actually a blessing that you may ponder why are you suffering. You may reflect and come back to the message, but instead what the human mind is, they continue to follow their ego, and their ego even becomes more stronger because they kind of know that they rejected the message and now they are suffering, and they become more arrogant that no, this is not because of that. They don't want to accept it, and they continue to go that way. And finally, they come to a point where there's no point of return, and at that point, probably God let them just go do whatever you want and enjoy your life. And then this is a very sad situation. And physical pain, cancer, all those things are not the only retribution. I'm sure many people, they suffer with psychological issues, and these psychological pain is many situations far worse than physical pain. I mean, I've seen people in the mental hospitals, and they're suffering with such a severe psychological problem. Just imagine if someone's spouse die or they leave them. You know how people become so crazy because the pain, the heartbroken. I mean, there's so many ways God can give retribution. Your loved one leaves you, or your child vanishes. I mean, there's so many ways God can, shake your soul that we may reflect. Praise God. And also, just think about those top leaders of like for example Hitler. I mean, how you get, even if you capture him, what kind of punishment you can give? There's no thing in the world that can give somebody punishment for killing 1 million people. I mean, this world cannot justify that, and the only retribution that can justify is in the hereafter. That's where everything will be held. I mean, come to true judgment. Mashallah.
Yeah, in one of the surahs in the Quran, God is the teacher of Moses when he met someone, and uh, mm, so he kills a child, and Moses asks him, "How could you kill an innocent person?" And in the end, he says that that kid, he will grow up and it will be a bad person, and God wanted to take his life and give a better child to the parents who were believers. Right? So when God takes something, he will give much better back if you are a believer eventually.
Yes, true, brother, exactly. I love the story of Al-Khidr and what happened exactly. Not Al-Khidr, and I don't know if they call him Al-Khidr. This is not the real name, sure.
A servant of God.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
At the same time, that story, God took away their son, but at the same time, sword of God was a test for them. That because if they are truly a righteous believer, they will trust in God, and whatever is happening, they know that there's a reason for that. From these three stories, also we learn anything is happening, there's a reason behind it, and so if they would have become disbeliever after that incident, that could be a test for them, and they steadfastly follow God, and God blessed them. The child. We had a person long time ago when I was a kid. We have a friend who I sort of feel that he was a quiet submitter, never told anybody, and he was a very different man. And he has a son that he just died without anything. He just like maybe heart attack or something, and he was like maybe 17, 18 year old, and right after that God gave them another son. So, and I believe that he may be a submitter because he was a very different believer. His thoughts and everything was very different. Praise God.
Losing a child would be very difficult. So now I am thinking, if that can be a test, as kind of an admission test, that's a very difficult test, actually. Is everyone who becomes a submitter going to have that kind of not especially that you're going to lose a child, but in your life, is it going to be that difficult, or some of us are going to have least difficult admission tests?
Jafer, well, I need to catch a flight, but I'll try to make it brief. But I just want to say that, the thing about the admission test we have to remember is like, the Master of the Covenant specifically describes that the admission tests are characterized by the fact that they do not leave any permanent damage. So, I mean, losing a child is kind of a tough one because, I mean, it's not a restorable thing, like you not lose a leg, lose an arm, or things like that. Losing a child is obviously a very difficult thing. So I don't know. I mean, you could maybe lose a child and maybe get another one. I don't know, but it's one of those things that is kind of difficult to answer. But we know that for a fact that admission tests do not leave any permanent damage. Everything you lose during your admission test is restorable, and God gives you even twice as much, so to make up for it.
Yes, brother, true, exactly. But I want to know, what is the admission test? I forgot about this expression. I'm sorry, in the Quran. Can somebody explain to me what is the admission test?
Yeah, so we know, for example, like God talks about, Job, like how he was, or in Arabic, I believe Ayub, right? And then we know about Solomon, Prophet Solomon, how God gave him all the wealth in the world. He was one of the wealthiest people. And so Job, on the other hand, was tested with a lot of poverty, a lot of disease. Everything was taken away from him. So these are two ends of the spectrum. When you say that you believe God says, do you expect to enter paradise without being put to the test? So we will be tested once we say we believe. Our belief and our claim is thoroughly tested through a series of tests, and these are defined as like admission tests. So you're tested through these things, the adversity, lack of health, wealth, or abundance of it, to see whether you worship God alone under all circumstances. So once you pass those tests, then you're a proven worshiper of God. Then you enter God's kingdom, where you will not have any problems, disease, or misery, and you will live a happy life.
The perfect happiness, the perfect health, perfect wealth, and perfect happiness, right?
Yes.
Exactly, brother. Exactly. Perfect. I understand now.
You know what the thing is that there are a few verses God says that how can you expect to enter paradise without me testing you? So the test, just imagine, God already knew that Pharaoh will refuse. He already know that. So why did God send Moses? It is to prove to Pharaoh that he refused on earth. Otherwise, if he just go to hell, that part that he refused God would have been missing. So God already knows who's going to pass the test and who's going to fail the test. It is for the person to see how he does in the test. It is not for God to see. It is for us to see how we do. So when we come and we apply in God's kingdom, so in any workplace, when you apply, they put you on a probation period for 3 months to see how you do. I mean, it's a basic, simple concept. You apply in a college or something, they give you admission test is to see whether you qualify into. So similar way, when we apply in God's kingdom, there's going to be some kind of trials in our life that's going to happen. And the mercy of God is that He says that He only burdens you enough that you can carry. Because if you're afraid of something really bad, I mean, then God is not going to test you in that area. He's only going to test you something that you can handle. And we really need to trust God during those phases that He is with me. His angels are with me, and when I submit to God alone, now I'm suffering. So this is a clear sign that you are in admission test. Imagine if God doesn't even say that in the Quran, that we will test you, and that part is hidden, and you come to submission, and then now you're suffering. Now this will be a negative effect. You're gonna say, "Oh, I submit to God, and now I'm suffering. This must be wrong." So by putting that verse in the Quran is another mercy of God. He's ahead of time telling us the minute you say submit to the most gracious, you will be tested. So you already know that you're going to go through this trial ahead of time. I mean, this is a huge mercy that He's already telling us that I'm going to test you. All we need to do is just have faith in Him and trust Him with our soul and body, that I'm going to get out of this. No matter what's happening today, I'm going to focus and I'm going to submit. This thing will be over. The stronger my belief is, the shorter the test will be. It could be 3 months or 2 months. That if I'm start lacking, this gonna go on to maybe several years. So a smart person will like really focus and get it over faster. Mashallah.
Exactly,
Actually,
brother Ali.
Mashallah. I also like to say you can also watch the video by Dr. Khalifa called "The King of Chaos." So
Yes.
he explains in detail about the admission tests and other
Okay,
disasters.
brother. Thank you, brother Solomon. Thank you.
Welcome.
So I just wanted to say something about like losing a child. This is like a true story for my aunt, who actually bore two children, but they died when they were born. And then my aunt had another son who died at the age of 7 because of cancer. So and we know that according to Quran, he has gone to heaven. But then after that, at the same time, basically they had two other children, two other boys as well, who actually died in an earthquake, basically. And the husband and wife survived, basically, my aunt and her husband, but the children died. Again, they were under the age of 40. They were like about maybe 18, 20, something like that. So I don't think that I don't know whether this could be among the admission test, or is it like a sort of a retribution on them, or what is it? I haven't found. I'm thinking about these examples that have been like that have happened to people, and I'm thinking like as a uh, newly actually guided submitter trying to figure out things or bring examples for them. So what do you think about this situation? Do you think
Yes, since I'm your wife, so I know them and I can actually comment on this, inshallah. And the thing is that so we know the people and we know that they like support, they support the government and they are, idol worshippers. They are even afraid of talking to us who are in the US, and they believe that they are talking to people who are disbelievers. They believe that, that land is the land of the righteous and this land is the land of, the unrighteous and things like that, which are like among the common belief in among the people in Iran. So I wouldn't say that this is an admission test. And given the fact that they're still insisting on those thoughts, inshallah, God will guide them. But so far, I don't see any trace of like belief. But,
you're right.
Yeah. Inshallah, like anybody else who has a comment, like since we know them, actually we see their reactions toward.
Mostly they are like among the people, not that they are actually. They're mostly following the path of the Shiites, not the path of the government, but mostly the path of the Shiites, which is also a deviant path, as we all know. But still, yeah, we know that even sometimes good people, it doesn't mean that if you're a good person, it means that you're going to heaven. So we know that being good is not enough. We have to worship God alone. So probably, but I'm thinking about like that's too much for a person, like losing 5 children. That is too much. I'm just thinking about it. I mean, yeah.
Yes, exactly, brother. Shocking. Losing 5 children at the same time, or through. I don't understand this really. God have mercy on them.
Yes, inshallah, they will take heed before the time is over, and they actually will save their souls, because this is, what we can do. We can only pray for them, and because those children are in heaven, as we know, and it's actually time for them, inshallah, to wake up as well.
Inshallah.
Yeah, I also want to say that the admission test is for people who decide to become submitters and say that they believe. So if these people are just idol worshippers, that it doesn't make sense that they're going to admission tests, right?
So basically, it is retribution, right?
Yeah, they're suffering outside of God's kingdom because they are not under God's protection. They're just for Satan to continue to harm them. But once you say you want to believe and you will worship God alone, that's when your admission tests start.
So when someone something happens to someone who is not a believer, can we then say, okay, this person didn't say that he's a believer, so it's not an admission test, so it is for sure a retribution?
Yeah, they're just suffering in Satan's kingdom, right? Everybody who is not following God alone, they're not in God's kingdom, they're in Satan's kingdom. So while you're in Satan's kingdom, you're outside of God's protection. So anything can happen to you, right? And that's why we see all the suffering and misery and poverty and everything that we know about, in this world. That's all because these people are, until they decide to worship God alone, they're all Satan's constituents, and they're just suffering from all kinds of things.
But if brothers, they don't know about the message, if they didn't know about Dr. Khalifa's message, they didn't know anything about it, what will be the
The thing is that We know that we all bore witness before God before coming to this world that we will worship Him. In the Quran, God says that we all bore witness. So worshiping God alone is a natural instinct that was given to all humans. So this part alone, people have the Quran at the very least. A lot of these people that we're talking about, so they have the message of God given to them. But the thing is, even if they didn't have a chance to read that, if people who don't know about Rashad, for example, and they're worshiping idols, and they died tomorrow, they will not be able to use as an excuse because they bore witness in front of God that before they were going to come into this world, that they were going to be submitters and they will worship Him, before they came here. So this is one of the verses in the Quran. So that excuse will not be accepted. Uh, but yes, if there's other details that people are not sure about or don't know about, I mean that's different thing, right? But the fact that someone's worshiping idols, they cannot say, "Well, I was worshiping idols because I don't know about Rashad," for example, right?
Exactly, brother. Clear now. I understand. Thank you.
Yes, mashallah, it makes sense. Yeah. So basically, if you're out of God's kingdom, you are in Satan's kingdom, and that's it. You're suffering in different ways.
Yes, exactly, mashallah. And also the fact that they might actually, either consciously or subconsciously, believe in that hadith that the most righteous are the most miserable.
Assalamu alaikum.
Also, all the people around them tend to feel, sorry for them and even think of them as very patient, very holy people, as they even they feel sympathy or for them, and they say you're really good people. But there's something fundamentally wrong with that system and this system of thought, and they should actually wake up, inshallah. But they just have to forget. I used to believe that the most miserable are the most righteous, and that's not right.
Yeah, that's the other way around.
Exactly, sister. This is not right, for sure.
Yes, Bia, go ahead. I think Bia wanted to say something.
Assalamu alaikum. I was just trying to say something. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So there is, I just want to give one example that there is God's mercy also in His system, because He is the most merciful Lord. So the people just keep in mind that God has given us the age of 42. The age of 40 is also before the age of 40. If someone dies, so it doesn't matter how much misery or pain he was or she was, we know by God Almighty that they will make it to heaven, the lower paradise, the lower heaven. So because I was listening about the person whose 5 kids, they passed away, and I know one family, they were our friends, and the lady was giving birth, I think 3 or 4 kids, and they all were coming handicaps. They all kids were handicaps. So one after the other, they were just keep trying, and then they had almost 3 kids, I think, and they were taking care of those kids. And then they were dying in front of them one by one. Someone was living like 7 years, some 10 years, something like. So they had so much suffering. They were, I mean, from that thing, their life was miserable. Husbands and wife life. Finally, after giving fourth birth, and that child was also the handicapped child, and then she just committed the suicide, and she was hardly 30-year-old, and but the husband is still alive, and husband is still taking care of those that handicapped child. Uh, and they were not believers, they were not submitters. They at that time, I'm talking about this even when I don't have this information and knowledge about the submission. And I think those were the early days of the Dr. Rashad Khalifa, messenger of the covenants too. So the message was not so much open in the world. And then now, after that, now I think and I realize that Subhanallah, God is so merciful. That woman's soul, like again, we go back in the high heaven, in the feud in the high society. So that soul was good soul. God knew that. So that's why she did whatever suffering she had in this world. But according to Quran, given the knowledge given by God Almighty, we know that she is in heaven. But still her husband is here. So this is also, I want to just to add this point into this discussion, that just we should keep in mind too about the forgiving Lord, that there is a time, so don't despair. So there is a time before the age of 42, mashallah. If we see in the world the people who are suffering and then they are dying even before the age of 40, so we just say, mashallah, how fortunate this soul is.
Mashallah, yeah, that's a very important point. Also, I wanted to mention, since we're talking about losing children, we have the example of Moses and his guiding teacher, right? And we know that there was a child that this guiding teacher he killed, and Moses asked him, "Why did you kill such an innocent child?" And he told him that it was God's will that the basically the parents were righteous, and this child, he would grow up to be a real tyrant if he lived. So God wished to substitute this child with a better child, right? And so that boy was killed. So we will have, so that's why I was saying, like, you can't be definitive, but the thing is, you can have these types of situations also where you can have someone in your household, and God knows that if this person grows up to be an adult, that he will make the lives of the parents really miserable. Of course, that child also went to paradise, but for the parents, God didn't want to burden them with the transgression and all of the misery that was going to come forward. So God took that boy, but for the most part, for the scenarios that we're talking about generally, losing a child is not a pleasant thing. It's a something horrible that people have to live with, and people struggle with depression and mourning for years. So that's not in itself necessarily a good thing, right? So this why it kind of makes this question a little more complicated than the rest of the questions. But let's say, for example, you lose a limb, you lose a leg or something, that cannot be your admission test.
I want to ask the sister that she was speaking now. She told that the mother commits suicide before the age of 14. I'm not sure it's right. I listen it right or wrong. But this woman is not going paradise, I think, because she commits suicide.
Well, even if you commit suicide, whatever happens to you, the thing is, God knows that which person, like, for example, if you're destined to go to hell, you will not even be able to commit suicide before the age of 40, right? God's system is that anybody who dies before the age of 40 goes to heaven. So if you wanted to commit suicide and God knows that your soul is not righteous, you will probably just end up with broken limbs and maybe paralyzed body, but you will still live to be over 40.
Yes.
Okay,
And you will not die. And you will not die. Yeah.
Exactly. I got it. Yeah.
Brother Suleiman, I want to ask one thing about, for example, losing your leg, right? If there is a person who is above the age of 40 and he loses his leg, right? He lost his leg, let's say. But can we assume then that this person is not going to believe anymore? Because Imagine that this person is
No,
going
this
to
just
be,
means that you did something horrible that was not an admission test, for
but he still
sure.
can believe, right?
He can
Afterwards.
still he can accept the message after that. The door is open. The thing is, at one point it reminds me of a letter that the messenger of the covenant he sent out to people, right, inviting them to submission. And he said that you can join God's kingdom and you can join at any time, but he said if you wait too long, you could be affected by Satan in Satan's kingdom, and some of those things could be not reversible, right, if you wait too long. So there could be people who, may have the message, may be invited to the message, and they don't listen to it, or do something very serious. I mean, these bad things could happen to them. Like someone could lose a leg, but that doesn't mean that. For example, you go see someone at your work or something, let's say, right, and this person doesn't have a leg. So you can't say, well, this person doesn't have a leg, so I'm not going to give him a message because because submitters will never. This will never happen to submitters, right? No, the thing is that after you become a submitter, and you live a righteous life, these things will never happen to you, and definitely these things will never happen to you as part of your admission test, right?
And what
But
about, sorry.
does that mean that if you commit something horrible, like you are really testing the limits? I mean, you could get a permanent damage also, right? So we have to be very careful in how we live.
And what about, let's say this person, he becomes a submitter, but in the submission, there is something like that you can have a perfect health, perfect wealth and happiness, right? So then this person, how can he expect to have a perfect health if he already lost his legs, let's say?
Well, I mean, he still has a chance, to better his life. I mean, obviously he suffered the consequences because he, did something really horrible. So obviously those things he will not get back. But maybe he's not. Just not every person is gonna be like completely perfect, right? Obviously, it depends on the person, right? So, but the thing is, if you have lost your legs or something, I mean, you could still lead a better life and God could still forgive you. Doesn't mean that the door of forgiveness is closed if you repent, right? But yeah, they're not going to have the same life as everybody else for sure. But, God controls their life. I mean, who knows that? I mean, if a person like that did exist, I mean, God could make ways for them. There's artificial limbs, there's so many other solutions out there, so they could you know sort of maybe live a better life. But the thing is, it's still a consequence. They may have to live with it. uh
But for sure,
that's
it will
how
be
I see
better
it.
than his life before, right? That's maybe the point. That okay, he did something wrong, and this was the consequence of that. Now he became a
Hmm.
submitter, and from now on, after the admission tests, uh, he will have the best possible life in his own situation, right? Because if he wouldn't accept the submission, probably it would be worse, right? It would be
You're
much
right.
worse than okay, mashallah, mashallah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the reason why I'm saying this, because there are people, I've actually met people that they actually say that they will not even give a message to someone who doesn't have a leg, for example, because they can never be happy, and this will not happen to a submitter. And I mean, this is absurd, but I've actually seen that in person.
So, mashallah, the message could save them from future, disasters like losing hands as well, So it's not, maybe that person is in
Hmm.
Satan's kingdom and they need the message to
Right.
save the rest of
Hmm.
their being. And
Yeah.
also the hereafter, like the life in the hereafter is the main life, the true life we are going to have, inshallah, and this life is going to pass.
Even if the people with the cancer, it's a big because messenger of the covenant, he is especially mentioned about the cancer, but that was an example. So like Adam, he explained that it's not just cancer, it's other diseases too. But if someone gets that disease, it doesn't mean that that person cannot improve him or herself after that if they were submitters. Even if they were submitters and they get this disease or any disease, any other disease, so they will not repent. They will, whatever, they will not take heed, or they will not ponder that wherever, they will be more careful after that. So they can work harder. They can ask forgiveness to God. They can reform themselves, and God will show them where they made the mistakes. So their diseases can improve, their diseases can be gone. So it doesn't mean if you see someone with cancer, it means now you have no hope for that person and you will think, okay, now this person will go to hell. No, we cannot make
Yeah.
this kind of judgment, because that
Yeah.
person is
Unless.
still alive, and that person
Yeah.
has chance, and that person
Yeah.
can
Mhm.
reform himself, and God is so merciful.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And unless you see that, their life quality of life is deteriorating, drastically, and then you see like they have a miserable life, and then it just ends up in their death at the end eventually, without it getting better and stuff, then that this was a disaster for them. So
Exactly.
continue.
You will see some clues very clearly. Will tell you that this person was suffering. Exactly. It happened to my father. Exactly.
So I think we all have many stories about people around us that didn't take heed, and we see it playing. We see people, especially among submission, who like introduced innovations in the religion or decided to reject parts of the message. And specifically, cancer is the disease of choice that these people get inflicted with, all of them dying of cancer one by one.
Exactly, pleasure. This is a horrible disease. God forbid.
Okay, so I guess if we don't have any more comments or questions, God willing, we can conclude our study for today. Sound good? Okay. So thank you all for joining us. God willing, and thank you, Brother Jafer. God willing, our next study is going to be English study is going to be on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Pacific time, and God willing, I will be the teacher.
God willing. Thank you,
God bless
brother. Thank you. God bless.
you.
Inshallah.
Assalamu
Thank you,
alaikum.
brother.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, brothers, sisters. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.